All right, I guess no corny Assassin's Creed quote this time. Welcome, Simple Rudd, and welcome back to another Animus build. So, figured on this episode I'd go through and get the reservoirs configured correctly. As you see, I have two heat killer reservoirs. This one is actually, oh, I changed the configuration, but this is the one out of Wayne Tower, and it's a 150. And then I've got the larger 200 that I had got specifically for this build. And this is actually configured the way I thought I was going to go. However, I've decided to make a couple minor changes, and I also need to flip some things around so the mounting holes are in the correct location. Now, one of the changes I'm making is moving away from mulets, right? And on top of that, I had a UV light on this as well because, well, I planned on having a glowing coolant in there, and I've kind of moved away from that decision, and I'm actually going with ARGB or DRGB or whatever they call it, depending on who sold it. This is EK, so it's DRGB. Now, I did go through, and Heat Killer makes their own ARGB strips for these reservoirs. However, I can't find them in stock anywhere, so that's why I have EK. Now, I did verify the sizes, so it is the correct length for what Heat Killer offers, and it's actually a little bit thinner, so it should fit in there. And basically inside these guys, you can see the hole right there. There's a little location for a strip. So that's going to be another thing that's going to need configured correctly. And lastly, what you're going to notice is I do not have a pump set up on this whatsoever. So I got to do that. Now lastly, one of the things I'm going to try is, what you'll notice is the tops of these are two different sizes. And the reason for that is this is actually a bottom. However, I believe I can take out, I don't know if I can get a good enough angle in there, I can take out the grate in there, or whatever you want to call that little spacer cheese grater looking thing, out, and I should be able to put this tube in there to make it, well, act the same as what this one would. Now, another thing I ran into that was difficult to find were proper length tubes. So both of these technically have shorter tubes. The tube in the 200 millimeters actually the one spec'd for the 150. And the one going in the 150 is the one spec'd for the 100. But, this is what I have, so this is how I'm going to do it going forward. Now, these get somewhat expensive. Parts are definitely expensive. Just this D5 block was $35. But if you can get the whole configuration, I think you can get this configured without the pump for like $110, $120. So that's not too bad until you add in the price of, a $100 pump. So $200 per reservoir kind of gets out of hand. Now, before moving on, don't forget to like and subscribe, right? Follow along this build. I got plenty more videos coming, including one where I go a little more into detail on all of the liquid cooling that's going into this and the cost behind that liquid cooling. Compared to when I did Wayne Tower, liquid cooling has got way more expensive. In fact, for this build, I actually went with EK fittings because, well, on sale, they were the same price as what I was looking at for Barrow and Bisky when I did my Vader build. So, everyone's getting more expensive. It's not just EKW. So with that, let's start taking these apart. Now, they're all rather simple, and you've got 4 screws, top and bottom, that mount to these bars and hold the tubes, and the tubes are held in place with a gasket. You can see the gasket here. You'll have a gasket for the D5s, so everything does stay nice and snug, and I never had a leaking issue, so hopefully going forward I don't have them this time either. Okay, so for recommendations on stuff like this, I do use my iFixit. Yeah, it's not automated, it's not powered by any means, but it's really nice, and it's seen some things. And then I do like to have little magnet trays that helps to hold the screws. In fact, I've got in this drawer a larger one that holds screws for the project as a whole, as well as some loose screws that I've just been too lazy to put in their correct location. So like I said, you got the 4. I'd go ahead and go through and break all 4 loose to ease the tension. Now when you're tightening them, you're also going to want to make sure that you don't just fully torque down one of them, right? You're going to want to kind of go diagonally, or I guess I would say across, right? Boom, 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 boom. But for taking them apart, break them all loose first, and then you should be fine with just completely loosening each one up as you go. And you do need to make sure that you loosen it all the way, which I apparently did not do. They're a lot longer than they look. Okay, so with that, the top of this guy comes off. I do have these 4 screws. Put them in my little magnet tray. As you can tell, they are long, so they are set to go through this block. Make sure that you are verifying that they're going back in the correct location. Now, before going too far ahead, I do want to take this apart and see if my thoughts on how I wanted to set this up are possible, which don't know that it is. Now, part of the reason I was going to use this bottom as a topper is because they're rather hard to come by. And it's another $30 tacked onto the build. With that being said, if that is my only option and that is the correct option, then that is the option I will be taking. So now this little guy has a couple threads on there, but I am noticing that it's not going to be deep enough to use this the way I had hoped. I can double check just to verify, but it's not looking promising, which means Performance PCs is gonna get another order out of me. So go you guys. Now to verify that this doesn't actually work, I grabbed one of the fittings that I'm going to use just to check and make sure, right? Because there's a small chance that it might still work. And if that is possible, then, well, who doesn't want to save 30 bucks? So now if you look at this guy, the amount of threads you have compared to the stopper, there might actually be enough room to fully seat the fitting. Right, and you just want to go hand tight. So I got that all the way in there. Man, that's going to look sharp. And then get the tube out without breaking it and see if we can fully seat that tube or not. Really hoping this works. I don't want to have to wait another week to finish this video. Now that one is considerably longer, so let's see if it works. So it doesn't quite tighten all the way. However, I think it's close enough that it's not actually going to matter. Now I say that because this is going to be coming in anyways, right? So your main leaking point is the outside. If it leaks on the inside, it doesn't matter because it's going in here. Now, ideally, you still wouldn't want it to leak because the whole goal of using this is to separate the liquid and the air so you can build your air pocket outside of it. Now, another thing you are going to run into with this guy is, it is considerably larger. So your tube is sitting further up in there, and it's not going to sit as far down into the pump. With that being said, I think I'm going to run with it. So I think what I might actually do is just steal an O-ring to put on there. And I think an O-ring will seal it up. Now to get the O-ring loose without destroying it. So robbed out the O-ring. And this should be able to just go right onto here. And this should allow it to seal up completely, even though that may not be necessary with this. But better safe than sorry. And I feel a lot better about that. Now that being said, I might have used the wrong port, so we'll find that out when I get a little bit further. Now with the top undone, you can slide out the tube, which has an O-ring at both ends. O-rings are not my friends tonight. And the fun part is you don't want to damage them because then you leak, and you don't want to leak. So let's get out the knife and try not to damage it. Now it's all in parts. Now, like I said, for this guy, you do have the channel right here for the RGB strip and the little slot for cable to come through. So I took the liberty of taking the other one apart, at least, as far as I needed to. Now, mistakes were made when I was doing this configuration before, and with that I ended up chipping the glass a little bit. I don't know how well you can see it. Now, it's not actually through it, it's kind of just a pressure fracture on the inside, so I shouldn't have to worry about leaking. Now what I had done is, one, I got a UV strip that wasn't spec'd for this, so it's too large, and then it also didn't have an adhesive backing, so I had to use double-sided tape, which then made it too thick, which then put pressure on the tube. Don't do that. I learned the hard way. Thankfully, I didn't completely break it, so it's still usable. Now, I had this one mostly configured correctly. So, one thing you'll notice is there is, of course, a size difference. Should be 50 millimeters difference, actually. Now, this is the section I talked about with your ARGB strip location. Now, for that, you do want to, at least I would recommend, having this hole wherever your pump is. Now, if you wanted, you could run it the other side, but since you've already got, the cables coming off of your pump, you might as well have the RGB right there to go in that same bundle. Now, while we're at it, we're gonna go ahead and see if mistakes were made going this route. Now, one of the nice things with EK is it does have the proper adhesive. It's got a simple cable, so you can just route this guy right through there and then place it along here so it fits in there. Now, as you can tell, the channel is only this deep, wide, however you want to call it, tall, and this actually fits perfectly. So cool, I did something correct. Now we will go through, pull off this backing, maybe, hopefully. Goes a little too deep in there. Get that out. Line it up in here how you want it. doesn't need to be overly perfect unless you want it to be. Now, one of the things that I didn't mention that is actually pretty cool about this as well is you can order just these. So they make them in a couple different colors. You can get the blue rods, you can get the unpainted aluminum rods. They have red as well, but you can also get them with the, the strip locations. So if you wanted, you could spec it out to have all 4 of them with RGB cutouts, slots, if you really want, your reservoir to glow. So this is what the bottom of the pump guy looks like. You do have your gasket in here. Now, this backing goes on with all those extra screws. There are a lot. And then you do got to make sure you've got your O-ring on the inside. Take out whatever that is on there as well, because that is gross. So you got that. Now, for the location of this, it's going to actually be like this with my tubes going backwards. Hopefully you can still see it. So tubes backwards, and by tubes I mean the out tube is going to go backwards. Pump's going to be there, mounting bracket on the front. For now I got the heat killer out, kind of like it, and it shouldn't draw away from the theme too much, so I'm going to leave that one there. Go through and put the tube on, in, however you want to say it. And now I do not have that extra pressure, so that is very handy. Now, one thing I need to make sure of is I've got these here. This also has the same mounting option. So I also need this to be on the bottom so that my air goes to the top, where I will also have the fill port. So that being said, oh no, I'm incorrect. I gotta switch it. But it'll be something like that, right? One will be a fill/drain because, well, I didn't really have a better idea for a drain, because I'm already concerned on where I'm going to fit everything as is. So it's going to be a little more difficult to drain, but hopefully that's not something that I'm doing a ton of. Now, oh, yep, O-ring in there. You do not want to forget that. Mounting holes there, that guy at the bottom. Then you just want to make sure that you put the proper screws back, because I do have already 3 different lengths of screws. The one design thing I'm not a fan of on these reservoirs is there are 3 different screw sizes. As a mechanical designer myself, sometimes there are cases where you have to do that, but ideally, you try to be, universal, I guess would be the proper term, but you would want, 1 screw size, because it's easier to assemble, of course, and easier to take apart, takes less tools, takes less orders. Like I said, you want to go diagonal, make sure you get them all tightened up. With this one, you do feel a fair amount of pressure, right? And then just to double check, I'm going to verify the bottom in a very similar pattern, and that is good. So now I have my mounting holes correct, and this guy will go like this. Hopefully I'm still in the shot. And she's pretty big, but probably sit somewhere like that. with your incoming tube at the top, outgoing right there. Now with this being at an angle, your pump will always have liquid as long as it's filled up correctly. Now that is one thing to keep in mind when you are working on the placement of your reservoirs, is you do not want your pumps running dry. Now one of the main reasons I got a new pump, well, realistically the main reason, was to get rid of Molex, right? I didn't want any Molexes on here. This one's SATA. So it also doesn't have the extra, well, disgusting cable mesh. It's really fabricy. You can kind of tell it's already caught on some things and wound up. Wires were different colors, right? This one's just a black cable, pretty simple and straightforward. What would have been really nice would have been able to buy the gold covers that EK makes. Now with that being said, I didn't want to spend the money because I'm almost entirely positive that it will not match up. So wasn't even going to risk it. I'll just get a vinyl cut that can then go through and cover this because it will be at the front of the build. Now that being said, make sure that your O-ring is installed. It never hurts to grease it a little bit if you do have grease. I currently do not, so hopefully we should be fine. The main thing on that is, since we're not actually twisting on that O-ring, it shouldn't be a problem. Pop this off. Again, you got the cables coming at pretty close to the same location, right? This gives it a nice clean look. And you have 8 this time, but you still want to go diagonal, right? So get that one till it feels a little tight. Switch over to this one till it gets a little tight. And you do that around and around until all of them are torqued. And again, these don't have to be super tight. You will notice when they're tight, and you don't need to reef on it, right? Because all you need is to make sure that you have enough pressure on that O-ring that nothing is going to leak. But you don't want to over collapse the O-ring. You don't want to strip the screws. All right, and the first one is now configured correctly. That RGB strip looks pretty good in there, so that'll be nice to light this up. Still haven't decided on color coolant. With it being an Animus build, an Assassin's Creed build, what coolant color would you use? Now this, of course, came put together, so I do got to pop these loose for when I go to put the D5 into place. Now one of the things you're going to notice differently on this one is the way I'm mounting it. Now I set it up so that these guys just line up down here and it'll sit right under here. So those will line up in there. And I just got to make sure those are spaced correctly. Now there are little screws right here that actually compress this plastic acetal onto this aluminum bar, and that'll hold that in place. So with that being said, similar concept too, I'm going to have that feeding backwards, mainly because I'm not entirely sure I have room this way, but I did design it so that the tube will go out backwards, right? So I've got to make sure that is set up, and then I've got to think about where I want the cables running, and I think ultimately I want the cable up here, right? So that'll put it top and to the side, which is closest to the motherboard, giving me the ideal location to hide it. So same process as last time. Now I wanted to make sure this was in the proper location. Now I did decide to hide the heat killer on this one because they're different fonts, and ain't no way in hell we're showing two different fonts on the same thing. Not acceptable. I'm not sure how I managed to do that. It could just be different generations of ordering them, but nonetheless, that is the case. Now, one thing I do have to do differently on this one is I have to remember these guys. So they just slide on these little bars. And the way it is designed, once you slide them on, with it being at an angle, they can't actually pop off, but you mainly tighten them so they can no longer move up and down. Now those are correct, that is correct. I'm also hiding these so that you don't see the ports there for no reason. O-ring on this guy. Hope we get that O-ring on there correctly. I do not like that. Okay, O-ring is set up correctly, and then it's putting in the 4 screws. Same thing we've done on everything else. Okay, so now you kind of have an idea of how it's going to sit in here, and I made it kind of adjustable every which way so that, you know, I line these up here, line this up here, and call it a day. Now I'm pretty sure I already mentioned this, but in case I didn't, the plan with this is a dual loop. And there you have it. I now have 2 of them completed, correctly configured, and ready for mounting when I go to start fitting everything in place. Now the next video you will see, or good chance, is going to be going over the liquid cooling stuff. At this point I'm about 2 weeks out on an order from EK that was back ordered, so that won't affect you any. I am holding these videos until I can have enough set up that I can release them regularly for a while. All that being said, don't forget to like and subscribe. You know, comment down below on your thoughts and what you would do differently. I've never done a dual loop before, so if you got, you know, feedback or ideas on that, feel free to leave those comments as well. And with that, thank you.